Então, vamos dar início ao terceiro dia do nosso simpósio. Então, para iniciar as atividades de hoje, eu gostaria, agradecendo em nome da organização do evento, de convidar o professor Dr. Martin van Bottenburg, da Universidade de Utrecht. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Loud sound so everybody is awake. Again, on behalf of, I think, the whole SPLIS consortium, thank you. Thank you for inviting us to be here. Thanking also for your great hospitality. It's a big, big pleasure to be in Brazil and see how this country is really developing at a high speed and preparing for the World Cup and the Olympics. It must be exciting times for sport management and sport policy makers and sport researchers. I can feel the vibe. So good luck with the next coming years. I would like to present you a story about a very small country. And compared to Brazil, it seems to be irrelevant, as if this would be comparing the incomparable. But I will elaborate on that and show you that it really is worthwhile to have a look at this small country. I'm myself from the Netherlands, but I could not have made this presentation without the SPLIS consortium and without the whole SPLIS research. So the data I will present are about my country, and I can give you some background information. But to present this data is only because Brazil, Australia, Japan, Canada, and many other countries are involved in this project with highly motivated researchers like Maria, and with many people doing a lot of effort. I got my PhD in Amsterdam, and it was called, in English, the book that I produced was called Global Games, and it's about the popularity, the differential popularity of sport. And the main question is quite simple, namely, why is one sport more popular than the other? And what we do here in this SPLIS project is also related to a very small, simple and similar problem. Why is one country more popular than another? What I would like to show you that is that this question I raised in the late 1990s when I developed an instrument to measure what I called the elite sport climate. And independent of my efforts in this new field of study, I met Veerle de Bosser and Simon Shipley, among others, who were also discussing this topic. And we came together and developed a model and a research project which we now call SPLIS. I started with the measurements of the elite sport climates in the Netherlands in 1998, and then repeated this study in 2002, 2008 and 2011. So we now have 4 measurements in time of the elite sport climate in the Netherlands. And that makes it also possible to give some trends data. So, besides comparing between countries, I will also show you data comparing comparable data over time. So it's both a comparative, international, and a historical data presentation. And I think this is very useful also to show the relevance for being part of the SPLIS group for each country. SPLIS is also an instrument to order, to structure data, also to analyze data. It's theoretically interesting, but I think also it's politically relevant. And you can learn how to adapt, how to improve, and also how to innovate your elite sports system in order to raise the chance for success. So, what can Brazil learn from the Netherlands? Can Brazil learn something anyhow? I mean, compare these countries. They are so immensely different in size. And to refresh your mind, the Netherlands is part of Europe. It's between England, Germany and France, and Belgium here. And it's a very small country, as you can see here. This is about the same scale. So it's a very, very small part of Brazil. So does it make sense to compare elite sports systems in such different nations? And compare elite sports success in such incomparable countries? What I do is probably comparing the incomparable. But I'll give you some more indications of this. These are some figures. So Brazil has 8 million square kilometers, while the Netherlands only have 33,000. And that's a ratio of 2,050 to 1. So Brazil is 2,050 times bigger than the Netherlands. And in population size, it's 13 versus 1. So against the 210 million people living in Brazil, there are almost 17 million people living in the Netherlands, the whole country. In terms of gross domestic product, it's clear that the Brazilian economy is about 3.3 bigger than the Netherlands. But in terms of wealth per capita, you could also see here that the Netherlands is a bit more affluent society than Brazil. Probably it's not good to compare Netherlands with Brazil, but more with Greater Sao Paulo. The Região Metropolitana de Sao Paulo, is that correct? Right. This is, I think, also comparable in scale with the Netherlands, so it's about 1 to 4. What you can see here is that compared to the Netherlands, that's far more comparable. The land square is, the Netherlands is 4 times bigger than this region of Brazil. But in terms of population, it's almost comparable. And also in terms of economy, the Greater Sao Paulo region, I think almost compares to the Netherlands, because these are figures of 2005, but after that, I think the Brazilian economy has further boosted with Sao Paulo as one of the main engines of the Brazilian economy, while the Netherlands has become part of a long-lasting economic crisis, the euro crisis, which doesn't, and because of that, I think that both economies are almost similar today. Once again, a big difference, but you could also say, in some respects, we as countries can compare ourselves. I'm a bit modest here because I would not dare really to compare Dutch football with Brazilian football. I fully acknowledge that Brazil is a 5 times World Cup champion. And the Netherlands, I'm afraid, yeah, only 3 times Vize-Weltmeister, as the Germans say, so second. 3 times second in 1974 is Johan Cruyff, 1998 here in Argentina, and in South Africa in 2010. And you know, the second place in sport doesn't count. So it's incomparable, but at the same time, I think the whole world acknowledges the offensive and joyful style of playing of both countries. So probably we can be compared in that respect. And of course, we have had 4 clashes during the World Cup. And to my relief, it's 2-2 at the moment. 2 times a win for Brazil, 2 times for the Netherlands, with some famous games like Romário de Sousa Faria, who started his career in the Netherlands, winning in the United States, but also Schneider, who made the last goal against Brazil in 2010. So a bit comparable. And there's more. Yesterday, Mr. Frère said in his presentation that among some other countries, the Netherlands is in the Brazilian group. And he referred to the top 10 ambition of Brazil. Brazil wants to be among the top 10 best countries in the Olympic Games. And that's exactly also the official ambition of the Netherlands. So both countries, although incomparable in size, have the same ambition to become among the top 10 best performing elite sport countries in the world. And you can see here that that is not a dream, even not for such a small country as the Netherlands is. In London, the Netherlands were 11th placed based on the total number of medals. And also based on the total number of medals, the Netherlands were 10th in Sydney, so they performed according to their ambition. 13th in Athens and 16th in Beijing. And in Sydney, which was the best performing Olympics ever for the Netherlands, in terms of gold medals, the Netherlands were even 8th place. So we think it's a high ambition to be among those big countries in the top 10. United States, China, Germany, France, Italy, Japan. You know, the competition is huge, especially for such a small country. But the recent history proves that it is possible. And if it's possible for the Netherlands, then it surely is possible also for Brazil. Veerle showed another picture 2 days ago, that was this one, which showed that the Netherlands is also highly efficient. It must be highly efficient to have this ambition of being among the top 10 best performing countries in the world while having such a small population. And this picture shows that there are 3 countries, France, Australia and the Netherlands, who perform better than could be expected on the basis of their wealth and income and population size. And also according, and that's shown here, to their elite sport expenditures. So the performance is high, also compared to the money put in the elite sport system. And in that respect, it's interesting that we have 2 cases here discussed, Australia and Netherlands, in which Australia is of course much bigger than the Netherlands, but in population size, they're relatively comparable. Here you see a comparison of the Olympic medals won by Brazil and the Olympic medals won by the Netherlands. Both are referring to the Summer Olympic Games. From 1948 until 2012. And in fact, you see in broad lines the same trends. That means that Brazil and the Netherlands both struggled until the late 1980s, and since the early 1990s, both countries have improved their position. The Netherlands has won a bit more medals than Brazil, but both are, and I think this picture clearly shows that both are ambitious and increasingly investing, and also, at least I would say for Brazil, have a strong potential. But it's of course not in line with the big differences between both countries with which I started this presentation. In total, over the last 5 Olympic Games, from Atlanta to London, the Dutch won 102 medals against 69 for Brazil. And with respect to the Paralympic Games, both are comparable. 165 medals for the Netherlands and 166 for Brazil. But if you only look at the last 2 games, Beijing and London, then Brazil is performing far better than the Netherlands. So Brazil is really increasing its number of medals won, while the Netherlands is struggling to keep its position. This, I think, is really interesting also compared to the big differences between both countries, because it raises questions, and these questions lay at the basis of this presentation. That means, on the basis of their size and the basis of the relatively small number of people living in the Netherlands, you would not expect the Netherlands to win so many medals. So, how to make sense of that? How to explain why the Netherlands is relatively performing well related to its size and population? And that's also interesting in the context of the theoretical framework of SPLIS, because we started our model with an analysis of the distribution of medals over the countries. And on the basis of a literature study, it can be easily shown that the spread of medals over countries is at least for 50%, can at least for 50% be explained by 2 factors, and that is money and people, welfare and population. But that's only 50%. And our idea, and that lays at the foundation of SPLIS, is that the other 50% can be explained, but also influenced by sports policy. So these 50% can hardly be influenced. As a country, the Netherlands cannot aspire to be much bigger than its 17 million inhabitants. In terms of money, we are part of a crisis, and it cannot be influenced, at least not by sports policy. But sport policy factors can be influenced, and then you need to know what are the crucial key indicators and the performance indicators which can be influenced to increase your chances for success. This is a completely different picture. These are not scientists, of course. These are 5 Dutch scientists. 5 scientists who lived in the early 20th century and who won 5 Nobel Prizes between 1904 and 1913. So in 9 years, the Netherlands won suddenly 5 Nobel Prizes. And it was in the early 1990s that I read a book about that. And the question in that book was, how come that the Netherlands, that Dutch scientists could win suddenly in such a short time 5 Nobel Prizes in science. And the analysis of the author, who did his PhD on that subject, was so intriguing. And reading this subject, I thought, wow, this can also be applied to sport. And he also gave an explanation of how it could be explained that the Netherlands had so much Nobel Prizes, also compared to the USA, to France and to Germany. And if you look at the output of Dutch scientists, why in a certain period of time they suddenly performed better than ever before. And one of the conclusions of the book was that this success is not accidental. It was a product of an improved scientific climate. Just like you can also improve your elite sport climate. So the climate in which people try to get the most out of themselves. And he showed that there were better training opportunities created in the late 19th century in the Netherlands. There were more professors, fewer students, higher social status, higher salaries, improved laboratories, and all these improvements were better than in competing other nations. And he not only stated this, but he also proved it empirically. So it was a very rich study. And also a pioneering work. And then, if you take a look at the, again, at the sporting success in the Netherlands, you could also say, wow, how to explain this huge difference between the 90s and further on compared to the period before. What has changed in this period? And how does it compare to other nations? And I think one of the main ideas behind this study is that you always need talent. But success of a country in certain periods cannot be sufficiently explained only by accidental birth of some talent. Talent is an individual capacity, but this individual capacity, this individual talent can only be fully expressed in a broader social, political environment which stimulates, encourages talent to blossom. And therefore you need the help of others, you need the help of government organizations, sport organizations, you need to have money in, you need to attract good trainers, have good facilities, etc., etc. So, on the basis of this analysis in science, we compared it also in the Netherlands with sport, and we had some hypotheses. If science was improved by better training opportunities, what's the impact of better training opportunities in elite sport? If more professors and fewer students is important, what is the impact of having better paid athletes? If the social status is important to attract more talent to science, then the same could be true for elite sport. If improved laboratories is important, then it could also be important to have better sport facilities. And of course, it's always relative. You can improve yourself, but if your competing country is improving more than you do, then in fact, it's not an improvement, but going backwards. So you have always to compare it with other nations. And the story of the Netherlands is indeed that something completely changed in the 1990s. And I remember yesterday's presentation by Simon Shipley, who also showed that in the UK there was a culture change in the early 1990s in the UK, where suddenly the idea about elite sport in relation to the attitude towards sport for all really changed. And the same story can be told for the Netherlands. Before the 1990s, there was hardly any central governmental interference in elite sport. sport policy focused on sport for all, sport for the masses, and there was hardly any investment. And also the national sport organizations, they did not have a coordinated, at the national level, sport policy. Every organization did it on its own. And elite sport was far more seen as an individual hobby of some crazy sport enthusiasts than really a collective responsibility. But after about 1993, this attitude towards elite sport completely changed. And one of the turning points was a merger of NOC and NSF. And NOC means the National Olympic Committee, which was only directed towards organizing or sending out the Olympic team to each 4 years to the Olympics. And NSF means the National Sport Federation, and the National Sport Federation was full of professionals and all working on sport for all. But because of the merger of the Olympic Committee and the Sport Federation, the professionals also became interested and could also apply their work to elite sport. And that meant a real change in attitude in this institution. There were the investments increased. There was far more policy coordination at the national level. There was a beginning and an increase in state interference. And very important also, elite sport was not seen anymore as an individual hobby, but it was a full-time profession. This is now the logo of NOC-NSF, and NOC refers to the elite sport institute of the past, NSF the Sport for All institute of the past, but because of its merger they have a coordinated and responsibility for both elite sport and for sport for all. In 1996, this change led to a very important statement by the national government. I've written it down here. Elite athletes can lay claim to an elite sport climate similar to that of other comparable countries. For the first time in history, the Dutch government made a statement about elite sport, and not just a small one. It said that each elite athlete would need and would be provided an elite sport climate comparable to other countries. And that raised questions also to me. What is an elite sport climate anyhow? And how to measure elite sport climate? And how can an elite sport climate be compared between countries? And it were these questions that indeed, for me, raised an interest in the work that's now, together with others, have led to the SPLIS project. This was from my perspective, and as I said before, there were other people interested in the same questions around the same time. I think also because of the same developments that took place in their countries and that came together in the SPLIS project. Looking backward now, as I said before, we have carried out 4 measurements of the elite sport climate survey. We have also published about these researches in Dutch, unfortunately, so I'm sorry to say, but this cannot be, is not translated in English. The titles are The Hunt for Gold, and Blood, Sweat and Tears and a Moment of Glory. But these publications have been the input for the Dutch context in the SPLIS international study, and there you can find also the figures, at least some of them, in English. We followed the SPLIS methodology in our studies. So in all 4 climate studies we had an input, throughput, output and outcome perspective. The input means simply what has been invested. The throughput means what has been done with all that money, and the output, what has been achieved. And in order to make this analysis, we did research with the main stakeholders in elite sport policy. And you can see here another question, and that is, what are the broader societal impacts? Why do we do this? Why are we investing in elite sport anyhow? And that part of the question has only got little attention by us, just a question of money, because we all realize how important that question is. And we very much hope that in the near future it will be possible to put this question also on the agenda. But it's a difficult question, and we really need deep commitment by countries, also in financial terms, to make that possible. Following the SPLIS methodology, we did desk research, document analysis and interviews, and we carried out several surveys. Even also a few more than requested by SPLIS. Just a normal part of SPLIS is a survey among elite athletes, elite coaches and performance directors. But in addition to that, for national reasons, we also surveyed talents, former elite athletes and the Dutch population at large. With different questions, they were not input for the SPLIS study, but we could make use of them in the Dutch studies. Since 1998, we had a response of about 30 to 40% in all these surveys, which is quite we were quite satisfied about that. But even more important was the response analysis. So not only 30 to 40% responded to our questions, but the response group was quite similar on several aspects compared to the total group of elite athletes that are part of national support. And that means that our research group, that you could and can generalize your conclusions for the whole group. What do the results, what does all this research then learn to us? And I will try to give you, to show you the main points of our conclusions with respect to the 9 pillars of SPLIS, and also here and there try to think about the meaning of this for SPLIS, for the Dutch case, and for Brazil. And wherever possible, I'll show you also some historic data. First, this is not surprising, the trend in the input, the financial input in the elite sports system. And you can see here that the Netherlands invested almost 100 million in the whole Olympic cycle of 4 years in the road to Sydney. And this has increased up to more than 2010 million euros in the road to London. So it has more than doubled in the last 4 Olympic cycles. And I think this is comparable to other countries, and that's also immediately one of the problems the Dutch are facing, and every country is facing. Increasing your money is not enough. If other countries also increase at the same level, then it's like a standstill. But you need to increase the money, the input, otherwise you go backwards. In this respect, based on the SPLIS analysis, as also presented by Veer the day before yesterday, this is relatively comparable to Brazil. So Brazil invested 74 million a year in elite sport, and the Dutch invested 52 million. There's of course a difference, but compared to the other nations, I think both Brazil and the Netherlands are part of the middle group. And apparently this is necessary to have the ambition for the top 10 ambition. It's necessary but not enough. It's difficult. I think both countries need to increase their investments to have a real chance to be structurally part of the top 10 of the world. Then the throughput, starting with pillar 2, which is about the policy structure and policy development. And in fact, that's, I think, one of the main explanations for the high efficiency of the Dutch elite sports system. As shown by Veerle the day before yesterday, the Netherlands are the number 1 in relation to all the other 15 participating split countries with respect to pillar 2. So it's highly efficiently organized. And although also in the Netherlands there are several problems with respect to who is responsible for what, and who does finance who, and who is accountable for what, but in the end it's really a quite strong and efficient system that has been laid out. In fact, it's NOC-NSF, the merger of both organizations I told you earlier about, that is the main policy organization with respect to elite sport. And the Dutch national government is also involved in elite sport, of course, but it does not do much more than giving money to NOC-NSF. And of course, NOC-NSF is accountable for that and is assessed, but it also has a very high relative autonomy in deciding how to spend the money. And it's also controlled, but not controlled by the state or other organizations, but controlled by its sport federations, who are part of the General Assembly, which is in fact the highest governing unit of NOC-NSF. So there is a system of, with a counter-ring balance of power, but also in which it is very clear who makes the decisions, who has the money, and who distributes the money. And I think that's one of the explanations that the Dutch score number 1 at this pillar. And you can see here also that having such a good and efficient organization also is related to achievements, performance at the Summer and Winter Olympics. So a nationally coordinated policy is very important if you would like to learn anything from the Netherlands. It's directed by one organization, controlled by sport federations, and gets governmental support. It reallocates not only governmental money, but also the lottery money, and advises also the government how to distribute its money via NOC-NSF over the sport federations. A second and related strong element of this governance system is its long-term planning. Actually, in 2004, the Olympic plan was created, and the Olympic plan was such that the Dutch thought about doing a bid for the Olympics in 2028. And they've discussed for 10 years whether they would go for that bid, and finally the Dutch government has, in the light of the present economic crisis, unfortunately distracted itself, so we will not go for a bid, but it is an indication of the long-term planning, which is relatively not usual, but at least common in the Netherlands. There are always 4-year sport agendas made by the NOC-NSF and the Sport Federation, in which the principles for the next 4 years, but also the coming 8 years, are laid out. There's a reallocation of money based on shared principles over 4 years. And in that long-term planning, also the coaches and the athletes are involved. each sport federation has a committee of athletes and coaches who can give their opinion, who are asked about their opinion about long-term policy of their federation. And also in the board of NOC-NSF, this powerful organization, one of the seats in the board is for the president of the athletic committee of the Netherlands. So they really have influence and power in the Dutch elite sport system. And such an organization needs professionals, full professionals, who are fully dedicated to their job and are full-time appointed to do just one thing, and that is creating a long-term planning and implementing that policy in the country as a whole. 4 strong points. Then, the next pillar, pillar 3, sport participation. This is also relatively a good pillar for the Netherlands, but with the exception of one element, and that is physical education. Physical education is clearly the weakest link of the Dutch elite sport system. It's 95 minutes per week. Physical education in primary education is compulsory, but 60% of the schools do not have qualified PE teachers. And there is very limited cooperation between schools and sports clubs. And also in the secondary school, there is no physical education anymore. But next to the schools, we have sport clubs. And we have many, many sport clubs. 25,000 sport clubs in the Netherlands means that every 1 out of 4 Dutch inhabitants are a member of a sporting club. It also means that, for example, in the village where I live, which is a very small town, only about 40,000 inhabitants, there are 50 clubs. And each club has its own facility. A football pitch, a field hockey pitch, a gymnastic hall, etc., etc. So there are great facilities and a great number of sporting clubs. And it has been shown that for each Dutch young every youngster only has to travel about 15 minutes at the maximum to get to a sport facility. So the accessibility and availability of sport facilities just to practice sport is at a high level. And that also means that the majority of children and adolescents do participate in sport. Even among the children with an age of 6 to 14, it's about 88%. But if they get older, the sport participation level drops. Nevertheless, compared to other countries, again, this is part of the strengths of the Dutch elite sport system, because the more people you have practicing sport, the bigger your recruitment base. Although, and that has also been clearly shown by our case study, that doesn't mean that leads automatically to elite sport success. So if you doesn't have an elite sport system that can stimulate these sport participants to become an elite sports athlete, then you hardly profit from that. So the sport participation of children has reached an all-time high today, but if you get older, then the number of sport participants and also member of sports clubs is falling down. Then we go to the next pillar, pillar 4, the talent identification and talent development. And this is one of the advantages of doing elite sport climate research over already more than 15 years, is that you can see trends, for example, in the age which people start with sport participation. And the elite athletes that were in 1998 among the best 8 of the world, started with sport participation in their sport at the age of 14. But today, 14 years later, this has fallen down to 12. So they have 2 years more experience in their sport than 30 years ago. And the talents also train more and longer. On average, in 2008, the talents trained 11 hours a week when they were 14 to 16 years old per week. And in 2011, this raised to 12.2. And that's also, of course, important to analyze and also to compare with other countries, because the training capacity of young athletes of about 15 years old is a good, a necessary indicator for later success. And as holds true for the whole Dutch system, here again, the talent identification approach is very systematic. There are 4 yearly funded policy plans. Without a policy plan of 4 years, you can't get funding for talent identification. There are several talent coaches, specialized talent coaches have been appointed. Several elite sports talent schools have been created, scattered throughout the country, not only centrally located, but also decentrally. New centers for sport and education have been founded, which means that their young athletes can live, train, go to school, just nearby, all in the same place. And as I showed, there are increasing number of training hours by young talents. The bottlenecks, however, is that there is a huge lack of talent coaches. Approximately 9 full-time equivalents per sport federation are required in addition to what we have today. And the elite sport talent schools, the studies show that they do help young people playing more and paying more attention to their sports career, but at the same time they also show a more study delay, lower study results, and also less concern about their post-academic career. So that's also a point of further attention. The athletic career then, and the post-athletic career, pillar 5. One of the innovations in Dutch elite sport policy over the last years is that each elite athlete who is among the top 8 of the world in their sport will get a stipend, and this stipend is also differentiated on the basis of the stage of their career. So younger elite athletes get less than adult and more experienced elite athletes. And having a stipend, also Simon pointed to that yesterday, is not only a question of nice to have some money next to your sports career, but it's also a necessary means for taking rest and not obliged to work next to your sports career or to go abroad for a training camp. So this stipend makes it possible to follow full-time training programs, and that is expressed here. First you see here this bar is 1998, then 2002, 2008, and here 2011, and it shows here the average number of training hours per week, and you can clearly see that the average number of training hours has increased over the last 40 years. But also the average number of training sessions and traveling time per week has been influenced by this improvement. There are more full-time athletes. At the moment, 34% of all elite athletes train full-time, 20% combines it with another job, and 45% combines it with study. And the elite athletes highly value the special support program that has been developed for them. There is a very good paramedical support, highly valued by the athletes, and a high rating also of service and facilities, like the stipends, but also, for example, leave arrangements for work. They get a car, they have a free rail pass, they have insurance contracts, there is a help desk. So all kinds of arrangements to make their life more easy. And why? Because then they can attend more, pay more attention, and fully concentrate on their sport. That's the reason why. Still, planning their career is a bottleneck according to 63% of the elite athletes. So that's still a point that needs more attention. Pillar 7, coaching provision and coaching development. Also in that respect, the Dutch have increased and improved the elite sport climate. The full-time coaches, only 48% in 2008 were full-time coach, but in 2011 that has been raised to 66%, which means that 66 out of each 100 elite coaches are full-time committed. Some combine it with study, others are part-time coach, but the main point here is that it is increasing. And also the coaches feel that they are recognized more for their job, and that it's more seen as a full profession, just a normal profession in society at large. I will combine Pillar 6, 8 and 9 about training facilities, international competition and scientific research. The positive points shown here in the Netherlands are that there is a high quality of training facilities. Also, the accessibility of training facilities is very high because it's very nearby for most elite athletes. There is a increasingly cooperation with embedded scientists who are working at the facilities and help the training coaches and the athletes to improve their training, and a use of highly technological innovations in several sports. The negative side of this is that many training facilities are available, but few are really accessible. Sorry, the other way around. Many are accessible, but few are available, because many facilities are also used for sport for all purposes, and it's a continuous struggle between both interests with respect to the availability of the facilities. The quality of the training facilities in specific sports is also problematic, just because they are created also for sport for all purposes. They do not all have the same high elite sport level. With respect to the scientific support, increasingly universities are interested in cooperating with elite athletes, but it's still scattered around the country, and there is a lack of national coordination in that respect. So coming to some kind of conclusion about this elite sports policy, some overall assessments. We always ended our elite sport climate with the question whether elite athletes think that the elite sport climate has improved over the last 4 years. And we did that in 1998 and all the other surveys until recently, and each time the stakeholders say that the elite sport climate has improved compared to 4 years earlier. So there's an increasingly an improvement of the climate. And the main characteristics are the introduction of stipends, the subsidized full-time coaches, the expansion of technical staff, improvement of medical support, better training facilities, more training camps, and that reminds us to the analysis of the Nobel Prizes in the early 20th century, which is really comparable to these improvements. So, a strategic approach is one of the main, I think, core issues in the Netherlands that can explain its relative success. The Dutch elite sport is also really, it has been successful in the sense that it is really competing for a top 10 position. There's a substantial growth in investments. Talent identification development is really improving. The talents make more training hours. They live, work and train together nearby. And the facilities and scientific support is positively assessed. We'll skip this. This is a summary of what I said. But if you go then to some challenges that the Dutch system is still facing. First, there is an increasingly discussion about how to prioritize the money in elite sport. And that's a huge discussion because every federation wants to further improve its system, but the money is just not enough to please everybody. So we have to focus, and strong and difficult decisions have to be made. And that will also mean that in some sports the Dutch will perform less than before. There is some bureaucracy and increasingly also a complaint, but I think that's almost everywhere in the world. Physical education is one of the big challenges because that can really be improved. With respect to talent identification, a lot has been improved, but people also discuss about whether we do not pamper or spoil our young talents with giving so good facilities to them. The professional careers after retiring from elite sport is also continuously discussed as a weak point. As I said, the training facilities are not always available. The number of talent coaches, there's an increasing need for them. The competition level in specific sports is not internationally at a high level. And the scientific support needs to be more customer-oriented. Increasingly, there has been invested in elite sport, but the number of medals won over the last 4 cycles is almost stable. So that also means that there is a discussion whether we should invest more in elite sport. And in that respect, as a population at large, we find a decrease of commitment of the Dutch public to support the statement that the Dutch government should invest more in elite sport. Which also means that it will be difficult and more difficult in the future than before to further raise its investments. So, I hope that this gives you a picture of such a small country, which in fact is not comparable with Brazil, which I think that still you can learn also from the relatively high performance of this country. And I wish you all the luck with further developing your own elite sport system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think it's better, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
After 2 days, my Portuguese is not yet good enough.
Or my English. Bárbara de Almeida, da Universidade Federal do Paraná, pergunta ao professor, ela agradece pela apresentação e pergunta: ontem, aqui o membro do Comitê Olímpico Brasileiro apontou a distância no Brasil entre o trabalho do comitê e as universidades locais. O senhor poderia comentar o papel das universidades e institutos de pesquisa no desenvolvimento do esporte na Holanda?
Good question. It's also about size, of course. It's difficult to work together with universities if they are scattered around the country. In such a big country as Brazil, I can imagine, the Netherlands has its advantage that everything is close, is nearby. So for me, it takes a maximum of, I think, 1.5 hours. I live in the middle of the Netherlands. 1.5 hours to go to each university we have. that also means it's just you go in the car and, well, 1 hour later you're there. So it's quite easy to collaborate with each other. And still it is not optimally used, I think. So the universities do collaborate with NOC-NSF, the Dutch sport organization for elite sport, but there are still complaints that they do not have the same interests. Sports scientists are very much oriented towards publications, while the elite sports system just wants direct applicability of the results, and there are continuously tensions about that. But because the country is also so small and everything is so accessible, it's not that hard to have that discussion and to look for opportunities to improve the situation. So that's one part, I think, in more general respect, that makes it difficult to compare both countries. But if you have modern techniques, the distance should also be less important than in the past.
A professora, thank you. A professora Flávia pergunta se o senhor sabe quais serão as adaptações que acontecerão no planejamento do ciclo olímpico em função da crise. A meta vai ser mudada ou os cortes recairão sobre o programa como um todo?
Very good question. In light of the economic crisis, there is a discussion whether we should adapt our ambition. And you can fully understand that NOC-NSF doesn't want to lower its expectations or lower its ambitions. And so the answer is, in the light of the economic crisis, they do not lower their expectations and ambition, but change their policy. And changing the policy means trying to get better results with the same or even less money. And that also means adaptation of the policy in the direction of more prioritization. The UK has made huge steps in that respect. As Simon Shipley yesterday showed, sport programs that perform get more money, and sport programs that do not perform get less or even nothing. And I'm afraid that the same will hold true for the Netherlands, that you need to do that in order to have the same performance as before. And you have to be very selective. And I think even smaller countries like Australia and the Netherlands need to be very accurate in that respect. You exactly have to know where are my chances, where do I have to invest, and who gets the money and who does not. And that also asks for big leadership, and I can't predict whether that will result in good decisions, but they're forced to do so.
Marissa Nogueira pergunta ao professor se ao final da carreira esportiva, aqueles atletas de alto rendimento que se retiraram, se eles têm a oportunidade de continuar trabalhando com o esporte de alto rendimento como treinadores, coaches ou gestores, por exemplo.
Yes, several elite athletes proceed their career as coach or manager in the sport federation, but I think that in the end only the successful elite athletes are also successful in their career if they change their sport career into a sport management or sport coach career. And the problem is not the most successful elite athletes. Like Pieter van der Hogeband, the swimmer, you know, he will get his money, he will get his job, he is one of the nice guys of the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands highly appreciated, very popular. Now the problem is the less known elite athletes. The less known elite athletes who have also invested a big part of their life in elite sport, who have not paid as many attention to their educational career and their professional careers as other people from their generation, who have not probably reached the top, but the sub-level, and then find themselves at the end of their career asking themselves, okay, that was my sporting career, I'm 32 years old, and what now? And I think that really is a responsibility not only for themselves, but also for the whole sport policy system and the sport organizations to create good prospects for these people, give good educational assistance to help them, because otherwise people will stop at an earlier stage with their career, and that will of course also lower the chances of becoming successful.
Nós temos aqui 2 ou 3 perguntas de pessoas que pedem para o professor falar da educação física escolar e o relacionamento com o alto rendimento. Se não há uma valorização excessiva na Holanda do alto rendimento, em detrimento da educação física escolar.
It's interesting, we have not finished our SPLIS 2 study yet, but one of the conclusions that can already be drawn, I think, is that it's highly significant that we cannot find a significant relation between sport for all and physical education on the one hand and elite sport success on the other. That means it's highly necessary to have a good broad base of sport participants and also a good educational system at schools, but it's not necessary and not sufficient. It's not sufficient for becoming really successful. So there is this physical education in the Netherlands is a weak point, but still it is compensated, I think, in the Netherlands because there is such a good sport club system. For example, my children, when they were 6, 7 years old, they did not practice sport at school, but after school they could go to any sport club they liked, and as I said before, there are 50 clubs on offer with all kinds of possibilities, from cycling to gymnastics and from swimming to football, field hockey, handball, etc., all within their reach. And next to the school system, there is such a good club system that I think this weaker point does not really affect the elite sport climate in this country.
Dali Eduardo pergunta ao professor, na realidade ele pede para o senhor falar um pouco mais se existe algum controle das atividades das diversas entidades envolvidas com o esporte de alto rendimento, como as federações. Né? Se existe algum organismo que faz um controle efetivo da atividade dessas entidades.
Again, a very good question. That is highly criticized in the Netherlands. So there is some control of how NSF distributes its money, but it's controlled by its own members. And these members are the sport federations. So the sport federations have a president, and the president is all presidents of all sport organizations, federations are a member of the General Assembly of NSF, and there they have the controlling power, and their NSF staff needs to account for the way it has distributed its money over the last year and present its budget for the coming year. But there is much opposition against this system because it's relatively closed system, and sport controls sport, and it's not an independent system outside sport organizations who control the distribution of public money, because it's partly lottery money, but also partly public money. So the taxes, out of the taxes that all people in the Netherlands pay. And it's a sharp question posed here, because it's really at the heart of a discussion at the moment in the Netherlands whether that should change or not.
A Laura Azevedo, da Confederação Brasileira de Tênis de Mesa, ele pede...
Sorry, I don't have translation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's okay?
Yes, thank you.
A Laura Azevedo, da Confederação Brasileira de Tênis de Mesa, ele pede só um esclarecimento. Quando o senhor falou dos gastos do Brasil de 74 milhões e da Holanda de 52 milhões, ele pergunta se referem somente a gastos federais ou do Comitê Olímpico. Ele pede um esclarecimento dessa verba, da fonte dessa...
Yes, what we compare in Swiss project is naturally coordinated distributed money. That means money from the national government and from lottery and also from other sources that are naturally distributed over elite sport system. So I know that each sport federation also invests in elite sport, but as far as that is not nationally coordinated, then it is not part of the data I presented, and we all include in our study. Is that correct?
The Olympic Committee is included.
So the Olympic Committee is included, because that is nationally coordinated.
In this case, it's much more than you are putting your stuff, much more.
If you also
I send to you.
add the National Federation in one. Yeah, that's
No,
true.
federal lotteries and in the state, the sponsorship of state companies is minimum 3 times or 4 times more you are putting. But they send to
Os
you.
patrocínios estão
We will
incluídos. Patrocínio. Patrocínio não, só
Mesmo.
loteria. Então a gente vai
Should I give the mic?
a gente vai passar. Não. Estou falando que a informação que foi levantada foi com relação ao que vem do governo central, o orçamento central que foi passado já pelo Ricardo ontem, o que vem da loteria pela lei administrativa e que vai levando código e tal para as confederações, e aí não estava incluído na informação a parte do Paralímpico. Não, das estatais não. Tá? O dinheiro, o suporte das estatais, que não, a gente não tem acesso direto a esses valores. Então, ótimo, tudo bem. Mas o levantamento, porque assim, no estudo...
Só o voleibol hoje tem 60 milhões de dólares do Banco do Brasil, que é o estatal federal.
Não, tudo bem. Mas no estudo, né, o que foi considerado a verba governamental de tudo.
Mas o Banco do Brasil é uma estatal controlada pelo governo 51%. É uma verba estatal federal. Não pode. State company. The owner is the Brazilian government, 51%. Minimum 51 to 8 or 9. Volleyball.
Okay.
Volleyball.
I think, can I add something to that?
In the coffee break, we discuss about this. Yeah?
Yeah, but it's also one of the purposes of this conference to have this kind of discussions, because we need to know how it really works, and I think that could be valuable also for
And the last one, a professora Maria Tereza pergunta, na verdade ela fala que nós pretendemos fazer uma pesquisa longitudinal aqui a cada 2 anos. E aí quais seriam as suas dicas para que a gente tenha sucesso nesse acompanhamento de acordo com a sua experiência?
Well, my experience and also my suggestion in the Netherlands is to repeat the Elite Sport Climate Survey each 4 years. So, and between, I think between the Olympic Games, for example, in 2014, 18, 22, because some trends are really not changing much, others are very flexible, but it really is quite an effort, and also puts much of asks much of the sport federations and elite athletes to survey them all, and also to analyze in an international context. I think about each 4 years would be excellent to find trends in the longer term. I know it's quite difficult, but I think both for research reasons and for policy reasons, that could be, in my view, an ideal, at least in our country.
Também da professora Maria Tereza, para a gente fechar, qual o apoio que o senhor teve, governo, Comitê Olímpico, confederações, exigentes, etc., para o trabalho, e se esse apoio melhorou com o tempo?
Yes, I really appreciate the support of the Dutch Sport Organization, Sport Federation and Olympic Committee in the Netherlands. They funded my research, but they also gave me access to the athletes, to the coaches. They helped me analyzing, for example, financial data, which were not published, but I could get access, of course, with some confidentiality. I was also involved in the evaluation of the Olympic Games in Beijing, Vancouver, and London, and I was part of their own team who had interviews with medal-winning athletes, with medal-winning coaches, with the support staff, so I could get a real in-depth knowledge of the system. And of course, I also contributed to them. Lots of analyses which were not reported in my books were sent to them. I've made several secondary analyses for specific questions. I gave presentations. I tried to mobilize the media to get more attention for elite sport. So, you know, it's a two-sided relationship, and well, I'm very pleased with that.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Tatiana to give you a little gift.